We want to share this with our colleagues around the world, particularly our colleagues in Sub-Saharan Africa. We've announced it to everybody, so we expect that people will be coming. And so as we want to be on time, let me start. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to be here on a Monday morning, and especially for me, I feel refreshed and rejuvenated after home leave. And this is my first day, and it's so good to see that the first person I see upon reporting for duty is Prabhu Pingali, fetching me to go downstairs to Bentley Hall for a meeting. So Prabhu and I we grew up together, shall we say, when we were young ladies and gentlemen. Younger. Yeah, and that is in our early 20s as we were studying together at North Carolina. But I would say that now, through more than 30 years of professional life, wherein we intersected in many ways, soon after our PhDs, as Prabhu spent some time in the Philippines, in Iri, my village, and I spent a lot of time in Hyderabad, his village. So essentially, we exchange villages. Prabhu is delivering a very important seminar today, but let me more formally introduce him. As a professor in the Charles H. Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management at Cornell University, and the founding director of the Tata-Cornell Agriculture and Nutrition Initiative. Prior to this, as I said, he was in many places after North Carolina. Most recent, I should indicate that he joined Cornell in just mid of last year as the deputy director of, that is prior to Cornell, when he joined in June 2013, he was Deputy Director of the Agriculture Development Division of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he was based in Seattle, Washington, for almost 5 to 6 years, from 2008 to 2013. Professionally, he's been well accomplished, been elected to the U.S. National Academy of Sciences as a foreign fellow in May 2007. As well as a fellow of the American Agriculture Economics Association in 2006, and a fellow of the International Association of Agriculture Economics, IAAE, in 2009, where he also served as president for almost 3 years, 2003 to 2006. And because of this accomplishment, our alma mater awarded him in 2010 Outstanding Alumnus of North Carolina State University. And he also received several international awards, including the Research Discovery Award of the AAEA. I have more things to say, but I should say that we should provide Prabhu the time to deliver a seminar, an important one, that will tell us about his new perspectives on the issue of agriculture for nutrition, and he will have, for some of you, surprising observations, for which he will conclude rightfully of getting the metrics right. Prabhu?
Thank you, Cynthia. Very generous introduction. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here on my annual pilgrimage to ICRISAT. As some of you know, this is where my career started as a summer intern in 1976. So I always like to come back to ICRISAT and pay homage to the place which gave me so much to start with in my career. I took over about a year ago with the Tata-Cornell Agricultural Nutrition Program. And the idea behind this program is to really bring solid expertise to address the question of why is it that India continues to have this high levels of hunger, this high levels of malnutrition, despite the growth that's taken place, despite the rapid economic growth that's taken place, and despite all of the knowledge that India has, and despite the success of the Green Revolution of India. So this has been a big question, it's been a big challenge, and it's been something that Mr. Ratan Tata himself has been thinking about quite a bit. And so a couple of years ago, Mr. Tata put together an endowment at Cornell to bring Cornell expertise to look at this question. So I've been honored to have been selected as the founding director of this new institute, and we've been working very hard at it. Given that I've had such a great experience starting as a summer intern at ICRISAT, I thought I would duplicate that experience. So there's a group of interns we brought to ICRISAT this summer, 5 of them here and another intern based in Mumbai. And what we wanted to do with this group of interns is to get really solid on-the-ground experience, addressing some of the challenges around better data collection, etc. Cynthia, I want to thank you for hosting them, Padmaja, Kavita, others for really giving them the help to do this job. And they're going to come after me and talk about their experiences and some of their learnings, and I encourage you to stay and listen to that also. So when I started to work on this program, we first started to look at what evidence and what data there is in India on the issues of hunger, on the issues of malnutrition, etc. And one of the things that was absolutely striking to me was how bad the data is. Let me be very clear. The data in India is terrible. And India is celebrated as one of the better data systems in the world. India is celebrated as having one of the better statistical infrastructure in the world. But when you actually look at the state of Indian agriculture, the data is really bad. And that's going to be my message to you. And as professionals, what we need to do is we need to raise our voice and say, this type of poor quality data is not acceptable. We need better data systems. And if you don't have better data, our ability to track changes, our ability to create metrics for tracking change will be very, very limited. Let me give you some examples. Irrigated area in India. Government of India figures of irrigated area in India report it's around 60 million hectares. But the same sources from IMI show you that it's almost double that. So where does the government go wrong? The government goes wrong in documenting small community level, individual level investments in irrigation infrastructure, small scale systems. The government's very good at tracking large systems, but not at tracking small systems. And this is a theme that cuts across all data systems in this country. Look at the data on hunger. India is seen as having the largest number of hungry people in the world. And I don't want to dispute that. I think India is a country with the largest number of hungry people in the world. But I think the number of hungry people in India that we see, that 200 million or so that we quote, is a wrong number. We're off by several magnitudes when you look at that number. And I'll tell you why. When you measure hunger, if you were in my class, I'd go through a detailed description of how you measure hunger. But this is how FAO measures the number of hungry people. They have a base value of per capita calorie consumption. And then they have a coefficient of deviation around that mean value. and they create a distribution of per capita calorie consumption. And they take, do we have one of these pointers? So then they take this red area below a minimum cutoff point. Oh good, thank you. This area below a minimum cutoff point of minimum calories required for essentially having a life. And then they calculate this area, and that's how you come to the number of people who are hungry, right? This is a standard methodology. This is how FAO issues its hunger numbers around the world. Now, the real question is the average per capita calorie consumption per day. Where does that number come from? That number comes from adding up all production that takes place in the country and subtracting out subtracting out exports and adding imports. So that's the total amount of food available in the country. And from that, they then take out some waste, etc., and come up with this number. Now, I went and looked at that number. That number is very good for crops, but that number is not good for livestock or for animal products. That number is not good for vegetables, horticulture products. Now, animal products, when you look at the Indian statistics on animal products, this includes milk, meat, eggs, etc. At the bottom there's a footnote. The footnote says only from the organized sector. Now we all know that animal product production, majority of it does not come from the organized sector. It comes from backyard production. 1 cow, 2 cows, 3 or 4 chickens, etc. That's the majority of animal product production, and that's the majority of animal product consumption in India. So that unorganized animal product system is not part of your FAO food balance sheets. Similarly, vegetables, horticulture products. Footnote at the bottom, only from the organized sector. Now, how much vegetables are produced in the organized sector compared to backyard gardens? Majority of vegetables come from backyard gardens. That's not included here. So what's happening is the number that we take for granted is actually a number based on really bad statistics. I'm not saying India doesn't have high number of hungry people, they do. But by focusing on this and not getting the number right, we can't track the changes that are taking place, and we can't identify areas which have higher number of hungry people relative to areas which have lower number of hungry people. Take the next set of issues. You're all familiar with this discussion that's taking place about how calorie consumption in India is dropping. Everybody talks about this. You go in Delhi, where I was a few days ago, lots of people talking about how per capita calorie consumption in India is dropping. And everybody has this nice stories around it. It's because you're buying televisions, it's because you're buying cell phones, it's because you're putting your children through education, you're eating less. All of that. And then I look at the data and I see actually per capita calorie consumption from staple crops is dropping across all income groups, right? But that's per capita staple cereal consumption that's dropping. What this data doesn't tell me is what's happening to diversification of diets. This data is not telling me what's happening to increased consumption of fruits, vegetables, animal products, as we talked about earlier, and more importantly, processed food. This data has none of that. Yet, we as a community are quite happy to take that statement that calorie consumption has dropped, and rather than question whether we have the right data, we are making a whole set of conclusions around the data that we have. So I keep pushing back and saying we need to get a better sense of this. The reason for this is the discussion is stuck on calories. the discussion should move to micronutrients, micronutrient deficiency. That's where the real problem is. The real problem is not with calories. But because we don't move the discussion beyond calories, you've got the Right to Food Act and everybody else focused on rice, wheat and maize, rather than focusing on pulses, on vegetables, on livestock products, etc. And this is where the problem is coming. So, unless we as a community push back and say we need better data on all of these systems, we're not going to make much more progress. So, I keep pushing on a few questions. I keep asking myself, is per capita calorie consumption really dropping? And I think the VDSA data should be able to tell me that. So do we account for all the fruits and vegetables in the consumption basket? Do we account for all the dairy products and livestock products? And we need to get better on that. And I want to get much, much better on eating out behavior. So when I go out and I ask somebody, one of the investigators, field investigators, not from ICRISAT, I haven't asked them yet, but other field investigators, are people eating out? They say, no one's eating out. But they are eating out. You can't have people migrating out of the village and not eating out, right? Simple logic. There's a lot of eating out behavior which none of the statistics, none of the surveys capture. The NSS does not capture eating out. The VDSA does not capture eating out. We need to get the eating out issues straight. Second is processed food. Processed food is a big issue. Even in little villages, you have kiosks selling processed food. They're selling the noodles, the Maggi noodles. You find Maggi noodles all over India. But we don't collect data on how much Maggi noodles did you eat in the household. We don't collect data on biscuits. We don't collect data on all kinds of processed food. That's part of the calories that you eat. And that data is not documented. Now let me go to some other areas. We talk about stunting and underweight of children. A serious problem. We know stunting is a big issue. But do we have the right number? When you go and ask a household, how old is your child? You write it down in terms of years. The child is 1 year, the child is 2 years. Now for a 2-year-old child, it makes a difference whether you're 13 months or 14 months or 15 months. Now if you document 13 months as 2 years, then you've created a big error in terms of your metrics. Because the standard for 2 years old is very different from the standard for 13 months. And what most servers have been very poor at doing is cross-checking the age of the child relative to the birthdays. Being able to get the actual birthday of the child. And nowadays you can do that. You can go to the village registry or whatever and cross-check that. And at least the minimum of finding out age of a child in terms of months or days rather than in terms of years. And if you do that, you'll have a very big difference in the metrics around stunting, the metrics around underweight, etc. Now this is a problem across the board. NSS data has the same problem. DFHS, NFHS data has the same problem. Every single database has this problem. The last set of issues, and I can go on, this metrics issue has become a big passion for me. And so I can go on giving you examples, but let me stop with just one more. Recently I've been reading a lot of articles about this new data which shows that women's participation in the labor force has dropped dramatically since the last whatever survey that was done, right? I don't know, Madhu, you probably know this. Now it says women's participation in the labor force has dropped. When I go to the village, I don't see women not working anymore. I see them working as much as they were in the past. So I keep wondering, why does the data show this? Well, the data doesn't capture the fact that women are doing their own agriculture production. They're only capturing the organized labor. They're only capturing wage labor, but not own labor. And by doing that, you run into this problem. Why are women not doing as much organized labor and moving more to own labor? Well, part of the reason is migration of men out of the house into other service sector occupations. Service sector is booming. A lot of migration into the service sector. And so this intra-household substitution of labor, much more of the women's labor is now occupied in own production. Now, instead of tracking that issue, we're having a big debate in India about why women are no longer working, etc. So I think we need to get a better handle on all of these issues. That's the essence of what we are trying to push for in our program. Much better metrics around agriculture and around nutrition issues. So what's our core activity? Our core activity is to look at this pathway between agriculture and nutrition. And when we think about this pathway, there are two big issues. One issue is around household access to food, and the second is around individual access to food. So how much access does a household have through income, own production, etc. to food, and how is that distributed within the household between men, women, children, etc., and how all of that contributes to individual nutrition improvement. And we go further on and we look at the multidimensionality of these pathways. So as we address the issue of individual nutrition, especially with a focus on child and maternal health, we then say, what's the role of household food supply? What's the role of income? What's the role of access to micronutrients through access to home gardens, through access to village level markets, etc. So you access to improved diversity of diets. And then we look at intra-household allocation of food. What's the access of women and children to food relative to men and boys? Who eats first? How much do they eat? What's the difference in diversity of consumptions between the various household members, etc. And finally, the role of what's the absorption of the nutrients from the food that's eaten? So what's the role of clean water? What's the role of sanitation, access to toilets, etc.? What's the role of the local environment in terms of diseases and overall health and health burden, etc.? And how all of these translate into improved access by the body to nutrients and improved overall health. So when we think about our program, we think about our program as cutting through all of these multiple dimensions. So by definition, anything we do in agriculture and nutrition is multidisciplinary. And it brings all of these different sectors together. So the question then becomes, what do we know about agriculture's contribution to nutrition? It's an age-old question. You ask nutritionists and they'll say not much. Agriculture's contribution is quite small. You ask agriculture people, they'll say, well, our contribution is huge. Without agriculture, there's no food, etc. Right? But then the data is not very good. Most agriculture surveys have fairly decent data on household income, household employment, decent data on food supply, farm management, agronomy practices, etc. VDSA, for example, has all of this data and more, and really strong data in these areas. But nutrition data for the same households is missing. So most agriculture surveys will ask people, what did you produce? They don't ask people, what did you eat, right? That's the big difference. And now Padmaja and others are working on an intensive nutrition survey. But you're an exception. These intensive nutrition surveys are very, very few in this country, especially when you tie them to agriculture surveys, when you tie them to income surveys. Very few. And so you can't really trace through this pathway across them. And that's not just for India. That's true across the world. Even the LSMS data, the Living Standards Measurement data, has very poor nutrition information. And because you don't have that, it's hard to have standard metrics that compare across surveys, compare across countries. And certainly making that link between agriculture and nutrition tends to be difficult. So the quest that we have is a quest for identifying a minimum set of nutrition data that we can add to agriculture surveys. And that's something that we've been pushing for quite a bit. And we've had a series of discussions around this, and the work that our summer interns have done this year is to address part of that issue of what's the minimum core data on nutrition that we can add into an agriculture survey. If you want more information on that, I've got a paper that's coming out in the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences, which addresses the whole idea of what's that minimum core data that needs to get into agriculture and other surveys. And so, that was the mission that I came to ICRISAT with, of trying to work with ICRISAT in creating that minimum core data set. And the reason we came to ICRISAT is because ICRISAT is the leader in the village level survey business. Even when I was here as a summer intern, 1976, that was the first year that the village investigators came back with the first set of data, all on paper. And in those days you had mainframe computers which filled a room this big, and punch cards, and people were punching data into punch cards. So I still remember that time. And so since then, ICRISAT has been pushing this agenda. And so I was really keen to get ICRISAT involved in this discussion and see if we can get this minimum data on nutrition into the VDSA process. And I hope we get it into all of the ICRISAT villages in the future. So what are some of the metrics, minimum core metrics that you would need to address this connection between agriculture and nutrition? So from a household, so let's start with the outcome. The outcome has to be in terms of maternal and child nutrition status. And here, some of the metrics around that are quite clear in terms of child stunting, wasting, low BMI for women, anemia, and vitamin A deficiency. These are some of the metrics on overall outcomes that one would need to track. And we'll talk about how one can track that. But most surveys don't track any of this. And if they do, it's basically heights and weights that they capture. What most surveys are good at is the household income part. And so there's very little one needs to do to add to that household income side of the story. And most surveys will capture some of the issues around women's status, which is a big part of the intra-household allocation of food, women's education, asset ownership, etc. But there's a lot more that one can do in that area. Most surveys do very little around sanitation and hygiene. I know VDSA actually has data on toilets, but one needs to do much more in terms of sanitation and hygiene. And most surveys don't have much on food diversity. In terms of what's the consumption at the household level, in terms of the diversity of food groups that are consumed, in numbers and in terms of quantities. And that's an area where there's a big lack. And that's something that we've been working on this summer. So when I think about the minimum core data and subtracting out the idea that there are other aspects of this data that are collected through regular survey work, the recommendation that we make is, one, we need a better way of tracking health outcomes for mothers and children. And we put together some of the anthropometric work that needs to happen there. And there's some blood work also that I'll talk about in a minute. And second is the food diversity. We feel that these are the two big areas where there has to be a lot more effort than there is today. So the anthropometric part is actually relatively easy to do. If you've got decent investigators on the ground like you do at ICRISAT, you should be able to train them in being able to take heights and weights of children, especially babies, etc. But getting the age right is a big issue. And I can't stress that enough. We need to get that age right for those children. Now, on the biochemical side, there's been a lot of advance in this area. In the past, if you wanted to do blood samples, you had to go take whole blood, put it in little cylinders, do the centrifuge, and then store it in cold storage, transport it to a lab, and then do the blood test. Today, you've got new technologies that can do this without refrigeration, without centrifuge. The dry blood spots that are available now, where with just a prick of a finger, you can have 5 smears of blood on what looks like a blotting paper. And this can then be sealed, and you can keep it for several weeks. You don't need refrigeration. You don't need centrifuges. So this has created a major breakthrough in the way you do blood testing. And so an investigator can actually go out, if they're trained properly, go out and do the dry blood spots as they do the household interviews. And bring that back to a lab, and it can be a week or two later. And from that dry blood spots, you can read out iron deficiency, anemia, hemoglobin levels. You can read out vitamin A. You can read out a whole bunch of different indicators that can reflect what's the nutrition status of the house, of the women, of the children, etc. This is a big change that's happened. More recently, there's been instrumentation that will allow you to read hemoglobin levels without pricking the finger. And that's been done by a lab in Mumbai. And we are working with them to figure out whether we can get more accurate readings from that and all of that. So once you get to that level, it becomes even more simpler and easier to do blood testing. And incorporating simple biochemical analysis into your regular household survey. So that's going to be a big breakthrough, and we should be working on that as we look ahead. But the big challenge from a household survey point of view is the biodiversity issues. And many of us believe that if you can track the diversity of food that's consumed in the household, then you have a very good proxy for the overall nutritional status of the household. And the challenge has been having good metrics that allow you to do that, and good survey instruments that allow you to do that. Some people have been using 24-hour recall. Some people have been using 1-week recall, etc. And there's goods and bads around all of that. And so what we're trying to do is test out methodologies, and you'll hear from our summer interns in a few minutes on this, on how do you do a 3-week recall, what's the relationship between 3-day recall, and the relationship between a 3-day recall versus a 24-hour recall. How do you get the diversity that's available at the market level relative to the diversity at the household level. So is there a way to do market surveys that allow you to capture that market level diversity, etc.? And if you can get clear instruments around measurement of diet diversity, then one can see a way in which we can incorporate that into the regular VDSA surveys, and then that allows us to then create a metrics around diet diversity scores. So I'm going to wrap up fairly soon now. So these are all things that keep me awake at night, exciting life that I lead, numbers and metrics and all of that. And some of the things, challenges that I see looking forward is, we're talking about the next round of the Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. By the way, the first round of the Millennium Development Goals, everybody talked about the goals, but no one talked about how do you measure progress towards the goals. So they used the really bad data that's there to say whether a country is doing well or not against that goal. So it's quite meaningless in terms of actual progress at the country level, and certainly meaningless when you go to a subnational level. We need to do better as we go towards the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to have a way in which we have comparable metrics across countries, and metrics that rely on much better data than we have been using in the past. And for a nutrition point of view, I think there is a huge opportunity to identify a minimum core set of indicators for tracking maternal and child health, because that's definitely part of the goals that are coming up in the future as they were in the past. I think there's a need for further work on water and sanitation and on environmental health variables. Right now, that set of variables is very limited, and many agriculture surveys don't even ask those questions. There's a different water and sanitation ministry, and they do all of that work. There's no connection with this. The NSS samples don't have good data either. So there's a huge effort that needs to be made, and I think VDSA can again take the lead in moving that agenda forward. And finally, I think it's time for us to mainstream this minimum core variables. We should mainstream them certainly in the VDSA, but then use VDSA as a platform for creating publicity to get this much beyond VDSA. I think we need to shame NSS into doing this. We need to shame the NCAR data into doing this, and lots of other groups. We can't, as a country, we can't afford to keep using, bad data to make big policy statements. We need to get much better data on the ground. With that, let me stop here. We have a short video of the work that our interns have done in the field. It's like 2 minutes. If we can show that, and then we open up for discussion. Okay.
The purpose of developing a dietary diversity module for the MNDA is to design a survey instrument capable of capturing the most essential dietary information at both the individual and household level. And hopefully this can be integrated into existing agricultural surveys. To do this, we targeted 4 villages for household surveying: Dopura in Ohrapalli in Andhra Pradesh, and Kanzara and Kinkad in Maharashtra. Our survey instruments were designed with women ages 18 to 45 who were responsible for cooking as the household proxies, and we used a 3-day recall period. Additionally, we held focus group discussions to cross-check the information and validate our assumptions made about dietary norms and cooking responsibilities, as well as collected qualitative information on the local markets. By collecting this information and assigning dietary diversity scores based on FAO food groups, we were interested in seeing how our results compared to the VDSA intensive nutrition survey data collected by ICRSAT for the same households. If the results are similar, this dietary diversity module could propose as part of the MNDA can be used as a simple and accessible tool for researchers from all backgrounds to evaluate levels of nutrition and dietary diversity in India and elsewhere.
Opening the floor for some questions that must have been stimulated from the seminar of Prabhu. Some may have been a little bit moved or surprised or shocked that there is something being revealed about the data quality. There's no doubt that it may still be relatively better off than all other data sets in the rest of the world, but there's more in question right now, especially on our mission of actually tracking changes. I think this is where the important call, it's a wake-up call to actually improve the data on which we are revealing recommendations, revealing changes on which the policy recommendations are born from. Okay, so I'm sure that Prabhu would welcome all your questions. Let me open the floor now. Any questions? Yes, Janila?
So thank you for a nice stimulating. So when you mentioned, gave an example mentioning that the data quality is poor about the irrigation data. So you said that one set of data is bad from Government of India, but the other from international IMI is good.
IMI.
Like, I mean, how did we arrive that this particular data set is good and this is bad? Like,
And I didn't make a judgment.
Okay.
I didn't make a judgment on good and bad. All I said is, here is the government data and here is this data.
There's a disparity.
Now, which one should you use? The government obviously uses the lower figure, and based on that figure, you make statements about rain-fed area, irrigated area, production, etc., especially vegetables. Whereas IMI data said how much, what's the area under small pumps, what's the area under community managed systems, etc., which did not get into the government data. That's all. I'm not here to say good and bad. I'm just here to say, here are the options that you have and what are you going to do about it. Shall I give you another example? What's the most popular vegetable that we eat in India? Palak. Palak paneer, matar palak, palak aloo. Give me one place in India, and this is an open challenge. Give me one place in India which has data on the amount of palak produced in the country. I've been looking for this for 1 year now. Just simple question, how much spinach is produced in India? There is no data. There is not a single place in this entire country which has data on spinach production. Okay, and this is the most popular vegetable that we eat. And so when I talk about iron-rich food, and I have no data on spinach, then how am I going to do anything about iron-rich food? Sorry, I didn't mean to go off on that, but yeah, I'm not making a judgment, I'm just stating facts. So, Mohan Rao.
Good morning. Just what my observation in BDS villages, there is a dry land. It is recorded in the government records as a dry land. After that, they converted it into wetlands by drilling the bore wells,
Exactly.
which is not entered in the government records. Still, it is looked as a dry land only in the government records. That is one of the reasons why the area under irrigation is shown low in the government records.
Yeah. No, exactly.
I was part of the team who did home gardens and nutrition under the potato project with KSIConnect. And I think it was quite interesting. But the most difficult part is to really do the methodology. Because sometimes even a one-day recall is kind of difficult. So I don't know if the group would be able to discuss something on methods, because this is really, really difficult, especially recall. And sometimes, you know, when the respondent doesn't say anything, so you just sort of like, okay, we just had idli in the morning, and then I think what I'm trying to drive is method is something really important, especially related study.
Yeah, and you're going to hear a lot about that later.
Yeah, I fully agree with Prabhu about all the data lacunas that you mentioned today. For example, you know, Dr. Jodha long back showed that, you know, people, if you take the food that people get from the common property resources in the villages, then you will find that many people are no longer, many people will move up the poverty ladder, or they will not be in the malnutrition category. So that is another area which, you know, provide. But nowadays, common property resources are deteriorated, so maybe they're not getting that much food. But that is one example of what you were talking. But coming to this point about data, we have to look at a strategy long-term and short-term. Now, for example, NSSO data does not take processed food into consideration, nor does it take food eaten outside by the families, for example. Now, the question is, can we convince NSSO? We can make a lot of noise, but how many years will it take for them to really, you know, implement that? And that has happened with several things, including, I think, many times the fodder data was not collected in the All India coordinated trials, fodder yields. But slowly over time, I think they started collecting, and it took a long time for them to really start that. So given that, I think we need to fill in. Now you're doing micro level data collection at the villages. So we need to fill in these gaps using some of the micro level data. For example, we ask the household, how much processed food do you eat from outside? Factor that in. Similarly, how much, how many times they eat outside? Factor that in. I think that factoring in those things and coming up with a number will, help us to convince better the policymakers on how important these things are. And this is just an example. There are so many things like that. We don't have fruits and vegetables production data. Only area data is available. But we have estimated production through different ways and means. But then the question is, how reliable are those estimates that we do? So all these things are there to convince, but the short term, we have to deal with them on our own. It's only in the long run that we can expect the data to change. That's what
No, I think VDSA is an enormous opportunity to add things like this, and then to show, and the fact that you've got such a great resource, but you don't speak up is an issue. It's time to speak up. It's time to say, you guys, you're still in the 1960s in terms of data collection, and here are the new ways, new variables that are having an impact, and talking about it.
Yeah, let me reiterate what the message of Prabhu, because I think the power of ground level choosing, which is a power that the village studies can provide, is really a cross-check of reality on the ground with what is revealed on the macro and meso information, which is in a way reflecting more averages. When you look at the ground reality information at the micro level and make a comparison of the disparity between the two, then that will have a more convincing power. So I think, as you say, it will take some time to convince. Let's start the convincing by showing that there's a great disparity. And I think the call, but we would say that we should make a call right now, together with the call that is indicating, with proof of what the micro level information reveals, because these micro level information are actually masking reality. It is masked by the averages, which is revealed by the macro level information. So I think it will be a call that we should reiterate. We are calling for a revival of this mission, so that micro level reality will be revealed.
Yes, no, so we should start, no, not a question. We should start with how much palak is grown in our villages.
That would be a very good start. Okay, I think our...
Yeah, I have some, I'll entertain just two more questions, but I don't want to ignore. Two people have been raising their hands. First, Srinivas, and then we've got someone there too. Yes.
Thank you. First, I would like to congratulate the wonderful initiative to set new standards or standards for data collection. I think which is required, as you pointed out, in many other sectors. I mean, you also pointed out about the irrigated lands, and since we deal with natural resources and land and water use management, I think it is a lot of inconsistency in numbers of irrigated land, or for that matter land use, is also due to the widespread disagreement on what is considered as irrigated land and wasteland or marginal land, because it's so, there are a lot of terms which are being used by the government and researchers and other sectors at grassroots level. So I think it is in terms of, for the aspect of land use, also it is very important actually to get the metrics right. Before that, we need to actually have a consensus on what is actually irrigated land, for that matter. I mean, before, of course, what Mr. Monrao said is also right. I mean, like a lot of things are outdated, data is obsolete. But before that, there is also a lot of disagreement on what is actually irrigated land. You know, most of the government probably considers only the command area as irrigated. So they're different. There's still a long way to go before actually commissioning some data collection or something like that.
So just one comment on that. If you wait for consensus, you'll never get it, right? Because the government community, the activist community, all of these communities in India are very vocal. They debate a lot. I'm an Indian also, so I love to debate. But you never get to a consensus. My suggestion is just do it. Like the IMI people just put the data out and said, look, we just counted pumps and here's the data. Do it and then see. You change people one person at a time. It doesn't matter. Srinivas.
Hello. I was quite surprised about the calorie intake of rural poor is dropping, and this is measured from cereals only, right, which is a really bad way to measure food nutrition. So I think the important thing is to include protein intake, which is in India is coming from legumes, and it's a ratio protein carbohydrate that's really important about nutritional status, and legumes and contribute a lot of micronutrients as well. So is it true that legumes are not included in that calorie intake measurement? I mean, it seems really surprising for India.
You should look at the NSS data. Partha knows more about NSS data than I do. But basically, if you go down the categories of NSS data for which that calorie data was put together, there's several things missing in that. And I don't know how much pulses are in the data. You can tell me more, Partha. But certainly livestock products are not adequately reflected, and which is the main source of protein that you've got. And then the processed food is not adequately reflected. So, but you have to go and...
Yeah, I would say legumes probably the main source of protein.
Could be, but I'm not sure how much of that's included in the data.
Included pulses, because normally food grains are included and pulses are part of the food grain.
But you have to check how much of that's included, because if you see a drop like that, it's just not feasible. It's not feasible for you on the one hand to say your per capita calorie consumption has dropped by a quarter, but your real incomes have gone up by 10%. You just can't do it. I mean, and we're talking about also real wages going up. You can't say real wages of rural communities are rising, but their per capita calorie consumption is dropping. something has to give. And so there's some serious data issues. And what I would like to do is I'd like to go back and look at the NSS data by category and recalculate those numbers.
Yeah, they do give by commodity type, fruits and vegetables, milk.
But this is the problem that we have, that there's not enough challenging of that information to say what's missing, what's not there, and are they collecting the right set of data, etc. And I'd like to get a better handle on that.